What is the thing we don't talk about in your family? A lot of people in my family are alcoholics. It's okay to acknowledge that they drink a lot, but it's not okay to call them alcoholics, even when they do things like routinely pass out on their front lawn, getting a huge number of DUIs, drinking so much Labatt that the company sends them a flag and a lawn chair, getting fired from Fabricland for drunkenly screaming at customers then barfing on a quilt, or getting pulled over on a motorized beer cooler by the RCMP. All those incidents can be discussed so long as no one mentions alcoholism. Next story. It was Thanksgiving. My parents had recently returned from Hawaii. My dad wanted to show everyone the photos. He connected the digital camera to the giant flat screen TV and started up a slideshow of my mother, naked, in their bedroom. He scrolled through several and then quickly turned it off and said, "Whoops. Wrong cartridge." I was 21 and my boyfriend was with me for the holidays for the first time. My mom started crying. My boyfriend went silent. I just said, "Oh my God." Somehow my 100-year-old grandma missed the whole thing. We never speak of it. If it is brought up, my mother will yell we swore to never mention that. And get red-faced. Next story. I thought it was that my aunt was hardcore into drugs. Turns out nobody knew. To be fair, I didn't know per se, but it was so obvious that I thought everybody knew but didn't mention it. My family was blown away when she got busted going to Florida to buy pills so she could resell them here. I was like, yeah, duh. Next story. The parrot from Hawaii. When I was in kindergarten, my family took a trip to Honolulu. While there, a man on the street asked if we wanted photos with his parrots. My sisters and I were jazzed up about it, so my parents said okay. The man had each of us holding a parrot, or a parrot sitting on our shoulder as my mom snaps some pics. Then the man asked my dad to kiss the parrot. My dad was not about this. He was not going to kiss the parrot, but to make my family happy and to get away from Parrot Man he did. And that's when the parrot chomped his lip. Blood and everything. To this day, over 10 years later, mention of the parrot will incite a 20-minute rant from my dad regarding parrot negligence, and then he gets so mad he has to go fix something in the garage. Do not bring up the parrot. Next story. I was always told by my family that my biological grandfather on mom's side died in a rock climbing accident right before mom was born. I found out last year that what actually happened was, while he was still attending a military college in the South in the 60s, my grandmother discovered that he liked to wear women's clothing after finding a box of dresses in his size and his closest. The next day, she came back to find him hanging from the ceiling, and she and two of her brothers had to smuggle his body out of the room and convince a coroner to rule it an accident. I'm honestly not even sure of who all in the family knows the truth, but anyone who does sure as hell doesn't talk about it. Next story. My uber-Catholic grandparents met when my grandpa was married. He left his wife, my grandmother got pregnant and they eloped in the 40s. My grandma was 18 and my grandpa was 27. He took her to her senior prom. No one knew about this until last year. And my uncle was born early. Apparently no one in my family can do math and never added up the birth and marriage dates. Next story. The numerous suicides. It's finally getting to the point where they admit that these people even existed, let alone died. One of my great uncles killed himself before I was born, and if not for all the group photos and my great aunt being a decent human, I wouldn't have ever known his name. My mom likes to pretend they died in car accidents or heart attacks. It made for some real confusion once I got older. Next story. My wedding day. It was a 6-month marriage to an emotionally abusive woman that ended with infidelity, depression, and homelessness. I'm totally fine now, but I don't ever mention it. So no one else does. My grandpa has brought the wedding up a couple of times for necessary reasons, but refers to it as that time we met you in the park. Next story. That our father lied to our family about everything: where he grew up, lived, militarily background, other family, jobs. We found out after he died, and never spoke of it again. It's been 10 years since he died. Next story. My grandfather remarried a woman who almost immediately developed Alzheimer's and forgot who he is. He is now dating his first wife while his actual wife is confused who anyone is. He refuses to divorce because the scumbag family of his second wife bailed when they saw how expensive she was going to be, and my family had to get her care because she was too much for my grandfather to take care of. He is almost 90. I called out the relevant members of her family for bailing and was told I was being rude, which might be true, but I'm also right. Next story. My sister's eating disorder. She eats a ton and goes on to vomit. She goes jogging for 1 hour or more per day, every day, no breaks even though her knees hurt like crazy, and refuses to eat any carbs, fruits and vegetables only. I seem to be the only one that realizes the magnitude of this. I seem to be the only one that thinks of this as a sickness, not as a temporal phase. It's like this for 3 years already, no idea when my parents noticed, in the life of a young woman. Whenever I say something I get shushed at and later have to justify my insensitive behavior in front of my parents. So I just kind of gave up on arguing. Not sure what I can do to change things without disrupting the family. Next story. When I was about 5 years old, my mom, grandma, brother and I were about an hour from home, and we stopped to get gas. We went inside to pay, but we were 13 cents short. My mom told the clerk, "Be right back, I'll go get it from the car." So we all go back to the car, and my mom hands me 13 cents and asks me to go pay the clerk. I go inside and by now a line has formed. I waited in line, not realizing that I probably would have been fine to just go up to the front to just hand him the money. When I finally finished, I walk outside and I could see our minivan driving away. My family was nowhere to be found. They'd left without me, in an unfamiliar neighborhood, 50 miles from home. I got scared, but I can remember feeling like, surely this isn't as abnormal as it feels. They'll be right back. Right? So I began to cry, and I walked over and sat on a concrete slab next to the gas station. I'm not sure how long it was, but at least several minutes later I finally saw the van returning. When they pulled up, my mom was bawling and she began hugging and kissing me and apologizing. Apparently what happened was my brother, 7-yo, closed the heavy sliding door and my mom, hearing that sound, assumed it was after I'd crawled back in, so she started to drive away. After all, how long could it take me to deliver 13 cents? The story definitely makes my mother look pretty bad, but because I was so young when it happened, and it was so out of character for her, I was never really mad at her. So for the next 15 years or so, we'd tell people that story and kinda laugh about it. My mom would laugh, too. Turns out, her laughter was forced. It tore her up inside any time we talked about it. She finally confessed to us how it made her feel, and we all just sorta agreed to never bring it up again. We weren't mad at her. We'd totally forgiven her for her mistake, and made sure she knew that, but she was never able to forgive herself. She's still around and is an amazing mother, we just never tell that story anymore. Next story. My brother who died. We never ever talk about him. It's so strange. Growing up I knew I had a brother and I knew he was hit and killed by a car walking home, but I don't know anything about him aside from that. I've seen his pictures, I know what he looked like. I don't know anything about his personality, his likes or his dislikes, the type of music he listened to. I once found his comics in my mom's closet when I was younger, but that was about it. It is almost like it's just a story and he wasn't a real person. It wasn't until my grandfather died about 11 years ago and my mother and I walked to his grave. She broke down into an inaudible mess, then it really hit me for the first time ever that he was a real person, as crazy as that sounds. I don't understand the pain of losing a child, but it hurt to see my mom mourn like that, almost as if it had just happened. The only time since then he was ever mentioned was by my dad a few months ago. Out of my mother, father and sisters I'm the tallest. My dad told me how the only one of us who was taller than me was Jimmy and how he always seemed to keep growing, how he probably would have towered over me. I almost cried, I wish I got to know him. Next story. My uncle raped my mother for 9 years and no one in her family wanted to admit it. My mom noticed behaviors his daughter was displaying and mentioned it, no one believed her. He died. Turns out, he was raping his daughter too. I'm honestly disgusted with my family, and with her mother. Her mother knew the entire time it was happening, but instead of having him arrested, she didn't say anything until after he died and then she blew up on the family.